afternoon, Special Agent Johnson. I want to direct your attention to the search of the 211 Lafayette residence, which you conducted on March 4th. When you entered the residence, you and your officers had their guns drawn, correct?
Yes.
And you and another officer entered the bedroom where Mr. Green was located?
Yes.
And when you entered the room, Mr. Green was sleeping in bed?
Yes.
And did you enter the room shouting at him, "Police, hands behind your back," or something along those lines?
Yes.
Fair to say Mr. Green was awoken by your shouting?
Yes.
And Mr. Green was naked when you first came into contact with him, correct?
No.
Mr. Green wasn't naked when you first came into contact with him?
No.
Everything was fresh in your mind when you wrote your report in this case, correct?
Correct.
And you knew it was important to write up your report as accurately as possible?
Yes.
And did you sign the report?
I believe so.
And did you tell the truth in that report?
Yes.
For the record, I am reading you your report dated March 6th, wherein you say you discovered a nude male sleeping in the bed under a heavy blanket. In your report, you wrote and signed to this. Does that change your mind as to your opinion on whether Mr. Green was naked when you found him?
Yes.
Okay. And after you took him out of bed when he was naked, did you then handcuff him?
Yes.
And then you told Mr. Green to sit in a chair.
Yes.
And at that time, he was still naked.
Yes.
And you then conducted a protective sweep of the area to check for weapons?
Correct.
And he remained seated in that chair while you checked for weapons?
Yes.
And eventually, you only handed him a trench coat to cover up with?
Yes.
And fair to say, between the time you entered the house, conducted the sweep, told Mr. Green to sit in the chair, and provided him an item of clothing, that took several minutes?
Yes.
And after locating drugs in the house, did you begin to question Mr. Green?
Yes.
And in fact, you told Mr. Green he was facing serious trouble?
Yes.
And you also stated that he needed to speak with you or face the consequences?
Yes.
And Mr. Green then stated in return that he thought it would be a good idea that he had a lawyer, correct?
I believe so.
And then, yet, you still told Mr. Green that he was better off answering your questions, correct?
No.
You didn't tell Mr. Green he was then better off answering your questions?
No.
And again, everything you wrote in your report, that was fresh in your mind because you write your reports relatively recently after the incident, correct?
Correct.
And you knew it was important to write your report as accurately as possible.
Correct.
And you did sign the report, correct?
Yes.
And you told the truth through that report.
Yes.
Okay, so again, for the record, I'm reading from the same report, and in that report you wrote, "I told Mr. Green that a lawyer would be provided to him, but because he was not under the arrest, but I told him he was better off answering my questions." Does that refresh your memory as to whether or not you told Mr. Green that he was better off answering your questions?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. And you then proceeded to ask him further questions about the drugs in the house and the lease you located, correct?
Correct.
And at 6:20